So welcome. We're going to be doing a YouTube live feature today on intermittent fasting. Another way of looking at that is time-restricted eating. Those things have some, we'll talk about them in a few minutes. I thought that whole thing was, as the English would say, done and dusted. I thought that it was pretty clear that intermittent fasting is healthy, that it works for both weight control and, more importantly, for our underlying metabolism, stimulating things like autophagy, which we can define later if you want. But there's still a debate. Now, why is that? Actually, an article just came out in a very good journal, JAMA, which in that article, it indicated it may not be so good. So what's going on? We'll talk about it again. But first, a word from our sponsor, and that's us. That's our channel. We'll talk about our content, some things that we have available for you. One of our most popular recent videos has to do with inflammation. I was taking some stuff that helps with basal cell carcinoma, and it creates inflammation on the skin. And in fact, there's a great model for that. Psoriasis. There are several people that have psoriasis or lupus. Kim Kardashian West has psoriasis. You can sometimes see it on her face. I'm blanking on the fellow's name. That he's a singer, Heidi Klum's boyfriend. He has lupus and he has it on his face. Why am I talking about this? This is a cardiovascular channel, right? That was the point. When people hear about cardiovascular inflammation, they don't really get it. But when they see inflammation on the skin, they get it. And so that's been sort of a major connect the dots episode for a lot of folks. It's been a very popular video. Other videos that have been popular, the 5 supplements that help cardiovascular health. Supplements always very popular. A lot of discussion about Vesipa, the super duper fish oil. Concentrated EPA, triglyceride over HDL. That's always a big issue, and sure enough, K2 is always a big issue. Now, we have this up, and we're starting to change things in terms of how we offer services. We've continued to respond to needs and requests, and now it's sort of starting to look like Aunt Tilly's closet. You just got stuff piled everywhere, and people come to the website and they say, yeah, well, I can see 3 webinars. Which one should I take? And so here's what we're getting a lot. We're getting a big increase in our interest, big increase in activities, sales, and people are saying, hey, Doc, there's too much stuff out there. What should I do? Well, here's the thing. We are working on simplifying our offerings to where we make it a lot easier to make choices. And that's probably going to take us a while. But if you want it from me, I'll give you what I think is clearly the best route for anybody. Now, here's the thing. For anybody, I still have to separate that out into 2 groups. We've got the guys who say, look, Doc, you're expensive. I'm usually just paying a copay, and you don't take insurance. So I want the most cost-effective version. And I don't care if I need to study a little bit more. I don't care if I need to organize some of my own labs and stuff like that. I just want to make sure that I don't have something like diabetes or some other problem that my doctor's missing. Well, that's the cost-effective version. That's the cost-effective group. And it's really 2 things: the Got Sugar webinar and the gold subscription. So you find out what's going on, what the big risk is for you, or how much risk you have. Do I have full-blown diabetes? And yes, I had 2 people this week who got the big surprise that no, they didn't have prediabetes. They had full-blown diabetes. Happens all the time. Now, if that's happening to you, or even if you've got insulin resistance, you still want to know about it. You still want to know what to do about it next. And again, very cost-effective way to do that is with the gold membership. You get evaluations with me as part of that. You get them every 3 months. As you know, I've spent a career supervising docs. In the Medicare Advantage world, one of the biggest problems we had was docs seeing patients more than twice a year. With the Gold membership, we see you twice that often. We see you 4 times, and we're very comprehensive. Again, typical time with a doctor, 7 or 8 minutes. With the Gold membership, it's 30 minutes. So we dig deep. Now, that's for the person who's wanting to make sure that they're healthy, but doesn't have a lot of money, doesn't want to go to a full comprehensive evaluation. Then there's the other side. There's the folks that say, this is my health, it's too important. I want to make sure that I get it done right. And that's what we've done always from the beginning of PrevMed for the past 5 or 6 years. So for the folks that say, look, it's too important, $1,000 or $2,000 or even $4,000, those are really a drop in the bucket compared to making sure that I'm alive and healthy and able to earn an income. So what I would suggest until we get all of our services coordinated better is the Got Sugar webinar for you. You can start with that, or just go straight into a comprehensive evaluation because it will cover the components of the Got Sugar webinar. At that point, then you can go into the Gold subscription if you want, or you can continue to do standard follow-up, which we've had for a while. So I hope that helps. Again, maybe simplify some of this clutter that we're dealing with in terms of what exactly should I do, Doc? Now, why do we keep talking about the Got Sugar webinar? Well, it just so happens that we've got one coming up on Monday, and folks will take other things. They'll take like the inflammation course. They'll take the plaque webinar. Those are all very important. But here's the thing that really makes a difference. Do you have that thing that's driving the vast majority of inflammation and cardiovascular risk in this country? Do you have insulin resistance? Are your insulin receptors getting old and rusty? Are they getting resistant to insulin? How do you find out? Well, this is how you do it. Here's samples of what we cover in that webinar. Why don't the routine methods like A1C or fasting glucose work? Why hasn't my doctor done this for me already? Why doesn't my doctor know how to evaluate prediabetes? What are the critical glucose values to know? Why is insulin testing part of this? What is... You'll find out. We cover that. How do you know how much prediabetes, if any, that you may actually have? And why do you call it insulin resistance or prediabetes or metabolic syndrome? Why are there so many names for it? What's the difference between prediabetes and insulin resistance? Can you reverse it? Jason Fung says you can. Is he right? Can you really do that? And if so, how? How do I know if prediabetes has already damaged my arteries? And how do I know, how do I gauge how to improve my carb metabolism and a lot more stuff? So as you see, that's the core starting point with our services. So here's a quick snap announcement. I talked with my management group this morning, and I said, you know what? Guys, let's go ahead and offer this for free. Call JR at 859-721-1414 to find out if you're eligible. Now, we're not going to do this every time. We've got it coming up Monday. We've already got, what, half a dozen people signed up and ready. We're going to do a flash giveaway. We want to make sure that folks have access to this information and start learning how much risk you have. So again, call JR or Michelle at 859-721-1414 to find out if you're eligible. So again, we have the courses. I've discussed those before. Quick 1.5 to 2 hours, and you're going to know more about cardiovascular inflammation, insulin resistance, plaque, than your doctor, than 90%, 98% of doctors, primary care doctors. And I'm not saying that. That's proven. It's in the science. Look up the evidence. We've got videos on it. If you want to get a comprehensive focus on the basics of how to protect your heart, your brain, your eyes, your kidneys from the ravages of hypertension, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high blood insulin, get the core course, the Louisville course. We'll be getting that out there. It's out there and available now. If you want to get it before we list it, you can just call, again, Michelle or JR. We've got some specials going on that. Again, a lot of these are becoming very popular now. The subscription plans, it's a much easier financial commitment. It's more budgetable, if that's a word. It's easier to budget for a lot of people. So a lot of folks are starting to sign up for that. Somebody give me some help and call Todd Eldridge and ask him why he's sitting on this darn book manuscript. I'm sure he'll blame it on me, but I'm blaming it on him right now. We're getting it out there as soon as we can. And as I mentioned, I've already started putting some of this on the website out there for free. Speaking of the website, if you've got our email address, or if we have your email address, we're sending you a weekly newsletter. The newsletter this week had to do with our most recent addition to the website, the blog article on a question that we get asked over and over and over and over and over again. Can you take vitamin K2 with blood thinners? I'm not going to go deep into that question right now. I get it a lot. And I wrote up the whole set of details, and it's all right there for you on the website. In fact, there's a lot of stuff there for you on the website. What can vitamin D do to protect your immune system, cardiovascular health? The K2 and blood thinners blog article. Here's a good one for dentists. Should dentists provide prediabetes preventive care? And the answer might surprise you. Especially if you're a doctor and you say, what are they doing, trying to play doctor? You need to read that article. If you're a dental professional, you clearly need to read that article. K2 and cardiovascular health. Liraglutide, Victoza, Saxenda for diabetes and weight loss. The triglyceride over HDL ratio. So again, as you see, we've got a lot of stuff out there now on the website. It's available for those of you who don't get into listening. And, by definition, most of the people listening now are, listeners. But for those of you who want to get into stuff that's written, we're getting it out there, making it available, again, for free. One of the most popular ones is this one right here, The End of Alzheimer's by Dale Bredesen. We have done a lot of work with Bredesen's group. We've been certified by his group to provide this kind of care. It's an interesting focus. And guess where it starts? Prediabetes. So there we go with what we have available. As you can see, there's just a lot of content out there. But we're going to get back to the program. The program of why is there still debate about whether intermittent fasting works? As soon as Aspen gives us the water ball. Now, many of you may remember, it's been a long, hard slog for docs that are way deep into the science versus the docs that are just, going through the motions every day, seeing as many patients as they can and writing prescriptions. The right thing to do is to understand the science and to spend time talking about the fact that lifestyle is documented 3 times more effective than drugs, surgeries, supplements, You can't procedurize, you can't stent, you can't bypass, you can't supplement, you can't out-prescribe a lifestyle problem. And one of the major focuses on lifestyle, the major focus, far and away, is diet. Now, there's a lot to diet, and one of the things that has come up time and time again is this concept of intermittent fasting. In other words, going through a cycle of fasting plus feeding. As you begin to look at that science, to me, it's just been piling up year after year after year, that it does help our body to go in cycles. One of the terms that you hear, when you hear the term intermittent fasting, most people basically, on a practical basis, mean skipping breakfast. There's a lot of other ways to do that. It's actually more healthy if you can skip dinner. But again, another way of looking at this daily intermittent fasting is time-restricted eating, TRE, closing that eating window. Walter Longo is one of the leaders in that space. So the day after Christmas, everybody was still, I think maybe most of us were overeating for the holidays, taking a little vacation. The New England Journal, the standard journal for the standard doc, docs can't argue. It's going to be hard to argue with a New England Journal article at this point. That finally came out with a science review. And so what it said was, yeah, it works. It should become a part of the standard of medicine for standard recommendations for lifestyle management. So let's get to exactly what that said. Preclinical studies, clinical trials have shown that intermittent fasting has broad spectrum benefits for many health conditions. Eating in a 6-hour period and fasting for 18 hours can trigger a metabolic switch from glucose-based to ketone-based energy, increase stress resistance, increase longevity, bring physical and cognitive benefits, decrease the incidence of diseases like cancer and obesity. In humans, the 3 most widely studied intermittent fasting regimens are alternate day fasting, 5-2 intermittent fasting, where you fast 2 days each week, and daily time-restricted eating. Now, here's one of the images out of that article. Intermittent fasting and the metabolic switch. Basically, glucose and fatty acids are the major sources for energy for our cells. After meals, glucose is used for energy. Fat is stored in adipose or fat tissue as triglycerides or fat. During periods of fasting, triglycerides are broken down into fatty acids and glycerol, which are used for energy. Fatty acids, glycerol, triglyceride, that's where it gets its name. The liver then converts fatty acids into ketone bodies, which provide a major source of energy for many tissues, especially the brain during fasting. Ketone bodies are not just fuel used during periods of fasting. They're potent signaling molecules with major effects on cell and organ functions. They regulate the expression and activity of many proteins and molecules that are known to influence health and aging, like NAD+ and sirtuins. And we're not going to go down that bunny hole right now of defining those. We're going to assume that you're familiar with those. In other words, biomarkers, markers of metabolism. Ketone bodies have profound effects on systemic metabolism by influencing these major cellular pathways. In the fed state, not federal, but having eaten fed state, blood levels of ketone bodies are low. In humans, they rise within 8 to 12 hours after the onset of fasting. Benefits of intermittent fasting due to the metabolic switch include improvements in glucose regulation, blood pressure, heart rate, efficacy of endurance training, abdominal fat loss. In other words, just a whole bunch of really good things. So Intermittent fasting and stress resistance. Most, if not all, organ systems respond to IF in ways that enable the organism to tolerate and overcome the challenge and then restore homeostasis. In other words, health, a healthy state. Cells respond to IF by engaging in a coordinated adaptive stress response that leads to antioxidant defenses, DNA repair, protein quality control, mitochondrial biogenesis and autophagy. In other words, cleaning up those mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Downregulation of inflammation, so decrease inflammation, improve mitochondrial health, improve protein quality, improve DNA, antioxidant defense. So a lot of really good things. IF stimulates autophagy and mitophagy. Now, wait a minute. Even if we know what autophagy is, auto, self, phagy, meaning to eat, the cell eating trash that it's created, what is mitophagy? Mitophagy, mitochondria. So what you're doing there with mitophagy is you're eating old, beat up mitochondria. While inhibiting the mTOR, remember that one? Mammalian target of rapamycin, protein synthesis pathway. We're not going to go down that bunny trail either. It's hard enough for me to keep on the straight path here. These responses enable cells to remove oxidatively damaged proteins and mitochondria and recycle undamaged molecular constituents, while temporarily reducing global protein synthesis to conserve energy and molecular resources. Now, intermittent fasting and aging. After nearly a century of research on caloric restriction in animals, for example, mice, rats, monkeys, and humans, the overall conclusion was that reduced food intake robustly increases the lifespan. In humans, IF ameliorates obesity, insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, hypertension, and inflammation. Well, if you improve all those items, what do you think is going to happen to longevity? In one trial, 16 healthy participants on alternate day fasting for 22 days lost 2.5% of their initial body weight and 4% of fat mass. In other words, they're losing more fat with a 57% decrease in fasting insulin levels. 57% decrease in fasting insulin. That's a big deal. In two other trials, overweight women were assigned to either a 5-2 IF regimen, intermittent fasting regimen, or a 25% reduction in daily caloric intake. So again, we've got intermittent fasting versus caloric restriction. The women in the two groups lost the same amount of weight during the 6-month period. But in the group assigned to the 5-2 intermittent fasting, in other words, fasting and then refeeding, fasting and refeeding, those women had a greater increase in insulin sensitivity and a larger reduction in waist circumference. Physical and cognitive effects of intermittent fasting. In animals and humans, physical and cognitive effects are improved with, or functions are improved with IF. Young men who fast daily for 16 hours lose fat while maintaining muscle mass during 2 months of resistance training. In a clinical trial, older adults on a short-term regimen of caloric restriction had improved verbal memory. In a study involving overweight adults with mild cognitive impairment, 12 months of caloric restriction led to improvements in verbal memory, executive function, and global cognition. So even caloric restriction appears to be having significant improvement with cognitive performance in older adults. Now let's talk about obesity and diabetes. On the island of Okinawa, the traditional population typically maintains an IF regimen. Intermittent fasting has low rates of obesity, low rates of diabetes, and extreme longevity. You remember? Read the book, The Blue Zones, or just look it up on your computer or your iPhone. The blue zones, the archetypical blue zone is Okinawa. What's another one? Calabria, Italy, where Walter Longo was born. Okay, so members of the Caloric Restriction Society who follow the CRON, calorie restriction with optimal nutrition diet, have low rates of diabetes with low rates of IGF, growth hormone, and markers of inflammation and oxidative stress. Wait a minute, what's IGF-1? Insulin-like growth factor. Again, these are all things that increase cell growth. They also increase inflammation. And you get a decrease of that with both caloric restriction and with intermittent fasting. How about neurodegenerative disorders? Not so easy for me to say, huh? Epidemiological data suggests that excessive energy intake, particularly in midlife, increases the risks of stroke. In other words, taking too much energy, you weigh too much, increase the risk of stroke, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. Cancer. A trial of daily caloric restriction in men with prostate cancer showed excellent adherence, 95%, no adverse effects. Several case studies involving patients with glioblastoma. That's a very, very aggressive brain cancer. Killed my grandfather, not my father. Killed my grandfather on my mother's side. It also killed a fellow named Frank Polk, who was the AIDS researcher that I worked with at Johns Hopkins. Several case studies involving patients with this suggest that intermittent fasting can suppress tumor growth and extend survival. Cardiovascular disease. IF improves multiple indicators of cardiovascular health in animals and humans, like blood pressure, resting heart rate, HDL, LDL, triglycerides, glucose, and insulin. In addition, it reduces markers of systemic inflammation and oxidative stress associated with atherosclerosis. The Calorie Comprehensive Assessment of Long-Term Effects of Reducing Intake of Energy calorie study showed that 12% reduction in daily calorie intake for 2 years improves cardiovascular risk factors. Now, why are we going through all these details? That's all known, right? As I said, and here's a spoiler alert, there was just an article recently that came out and said, maybe that's not true. We'll talk about it in just a minute, but let's just go into a little bit more here. So, a diet of 3 meals with snacks every day is so ingrained in our culture. A change in this eating pattern will rarely be contemplated by patients or docs. We need to change that. That's what the pro-IF guys like myself would say. On switching to an IF regimen, many people will experience hunger, irritability, and a reduced ability to concentrate during periods of food restriction. However, these initial side effects usually disappear within a month, and patients should be advised of this fact. Most physicians are not trained to prescribe specific IF interventions. Physicians can advise patients gradually over a period of several months. Reduce the time window during which the patients consume food each day with the goal of fasting for 16 to 18 hours a day. Now so everybody's all happy, finally moving in the right direction with standardizing intermittent fasting. And here comes this study on September 28th of this year. Effects of time-restricted eating on weight loss and other metabolic parameters in women and men with overweight and obesity. The TREAT randomized clinical trial in JAMA Internal Medicine. And here's the link if you want to look it up. It was a 12-week randomized clinical trial including 116 participants, 70 men, 46 women, 18 to 64, with BMIs between 27 and 43. Participants were randomized into consistent meal timing, CMT group, eating 3 structured meals per day, or the TRE group, time-restricted eating group, eat ad lib, eat whenever you want, from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m., and completely abstain from 8 p.m. to 12 p.m. the following day. The primary outcome that they looked for was weight loss. Secondary outcomes were the things that we've been talking about. Changes in weight, fat mass, lean mass, fasting insulin, fasting glucose, A1C levels, estimated energy intake. In other words, how much total food are you eating? total energy expenditure, resting energy expenditure. Now, as you notice, there's not a whole lot about other markers like IGF-1 and that sort of thing. The conclusions on this study were TRE did not confer weight loss or cardiometabolic benefits, and TRE was associated with a moderate decrease in weight, but it was not significantly different from the decrease in the control group. What the heck are we supposed to make of that? Aspen, you want to show the video? So I started this off a little bit early with, can you believe there's still debate about this? Dave Murphy joined and said, no, I can't believe it. And then he says, thank you, Dave. Don't forget to like the video. Thanks again. Shah Yar. Yes, please. Thank you, Shah. And thank you very much, my BJJ. And for those of you who don't know what that means, that's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Thank you so much for the donation, BJJ. Those donations make a difference. I'm post-retirement. I am seeing patients to support this channel, as you can tell probably already, even if you haven't seen other videos. I've got a passion for helping our culture recognize the pandemic that's far bigger and far more devastating than COVID-19, prediabetes. It's the #1 cause of plaque, which is in turn the #1 cause of heart attack, stroke. Heart attack's the #1 cause of death. Stroke's the #1 cause of permanent disability, and it'll soon be overtaken by dementia, many of us think, which is also caused by prediabetes. And guess what? Diabetes is the #1 cause of blindness and kidney disease. BJJ, good morning from Temecula, California. Good morning to you, BJJ, and thank you again. Kyle Walker lost 45 pounds on a keto diet in 6 months. But my recent OGTT numbers were 87, 127, 172, 215, fasting to 2 hours. So, not sure exactly what, if that's 0, 30, 60, and 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it is. But here's one of the bottom line points, Kyle. Anytime your blood sugar goes over 200, even in this kind of testing, you fit one of the major criteria for full-blown diabetes. Should you be taking metformin? In most cases, I would, but again, I can't advise you on what specifically to take unless you're my patient. Most of my patients who are diabetic are starting with metformin. Here's the other thing I'll tell you. Most of my patients who are diabetic, and this is not at all uncommon to see these kind of numbers, most of those patients control that blood sugar to the tune of like 120 or less month after month after month, except when they're getting one of these tests. And it has to do with controlling the carbs in your diet, because obviously you're not metabolizing your carbs very well, pal. And you're not alone. That is what's killing us. It's what's disabling us in this country, because you don't feel it, neither does anybody else. The CDC would say, well, there's 80 million people out there. And then they change their mind and they say, well, no, there's 100 million people out there with this. And then the UCLA said, no, you know what? That equates to about a third. It's really closer to half, over half. And all of those numbers were based on two simple numbers: fasting glucose and A1C. Well, Kyle's a good example. His fasting glucose is less than 90. So if you're depending on fasting glucose to show that you've got prediabetes, or as Kyle has, full-blown diabetes, you're looking at the wrong number. A1C is not much better. And those are the two things that everybody's doctor's looking at. Again, I'm not bad-mouthing doctors. That's just the facts. That's, again, go through the science. We've got several videos that go into the scientific evidence and details. Docs need to level up in terms of our management of prediabetes. My BJJ, fasting glucose, FBG, fasting blood glucose, post-meal glucose have improved dramatically in the past 2 weeks. Well, how did you do that? Perhaps 16 months of low-carb plant-based paying off. Could be. Also, past 30 days I've done with intermittent fasting with intense 60-minute cardio at the end of the fast. Good to hear. Thanks for sharing that, BJJ. Bill H. Good morning, Dr. Brewer. I learned a great deal yesterday on the call with you. Thank you, Bill. As a new patient, looking forward to resolving my IR. Yes, we're looking forward to resolving that as well, and that's the goal for the vast majority of us on this channel and in this community. Thank you so much for sharing, Bill. I appreciate that. Shayar, doing daily, 20 and 4. Very good. You're a better man than me, Shay, in this space. I actually need to level up again. I have gotten lazy with COVID. I'm also, here's one of my problems, and I've got a host of them. I can't list the number of problems I have in terms of diet. I like to eat too much. This is my mom and dad. My dad was my height, and at this point in this picture, I think he weighed about 250 pounds. He always weighed about 250 pounds. There's a lot of time in his adult life when he weighed 350. Now, that set me up for a couple of issues. Number one, in mammals, it appears that if the male is obese at the time of insemination of the egg or fertilization of the egg, the offspring is much more likely to have diabetes or prediabetes later in life, midlife. Well, I got mine, even though my BMI was 22, I got insulin resistant significantly in my late 50s, mid 50s, 56, 57. The other thing I got from my dad was a love of food. I mean, it's pile it on. I have problems with the amount that I eat, portion control, love carbs. A lot of people, their carbs problems is pasta. I was never a pasta guy, but I love breads. Breads and more breads. I loved sweets, blackberry cobbler, peach cobbler. I didn't like peach cobbler as much as I did blackberry cobbler. I loved coconut cream pie. I'm not going to go on. So I've got my own issues. So for many years, I've done a 5-2 fasting, and there was water fasting for those two days. For many years, I've done a 6-1. For many years, I've done a time-restricted window, 16 and 8. I've never really gotten to intermittent day on, day off kind of stuff. And right now, over the past 2 months, I'm not doing any of that. But here's one of the problems. I'm losing weight again. I'm 165. And when I start losing weight, it is really, really difficult for me to do that, continue to keep that intermittent fasting going, despite all the good stuff that I know that we just covered a few minutes ago. BJJ, every metric seems now suggest that I am no longer pre-diabetic. I think it was both the low carb for many months and intermittent fasting, and perhaps doing my workout at the end of the fast helped. BJJ, I would not count my victory quite so soon, because as we age, our insulin receptors get rustier and rustier and rustier. And yes, as we lose body fat, we can improve that, but we're not going to go back. None of us is going backwards in terms of aging. So you can clearly reverse all of those biomarkers of the outcome, but it's a much different thing to reverse the actual performance of the insulin receptor. Think about that. Oops, we're getting a lot of comments, a lot of interesting stuff, and so it's starting to. If I miss your comment, try it again. Let me know. Chuck K, hi doc. I do the 18-6 time restricted feeding daily, fast about 40 hours once a week, and a 72-hour fast once a quarter. I'm surprised at how easy this has become. Your body gets hardened to it. That's one. Thank you for mentioning that, Chuck. When I'm talking to folks, over half of the patients coming in, actually over 2/3 now, tell me, yep, I've lost over 30 pounds. And here's one of the things they say over and over and over again. I cut the carbs. Pardon me, I have just got the itchiest nose this morning. I know Walter Cronkite wouldn't do that. I also know that I'm dating myself when I mention Walter Cronkite. Anyway, so these patients come in and they say, yep, doc, I've got plaque there because I was obese for a while, and now I've lost 30 pounds. Or like Dave Murphy has shared with us, 150 pounds. Huge. And almost 9 out of 10 of those folks that's lost 30 pounds or more says the same thing. Well, first I started by decreasing carbs, and then I started closing that time-restricted eating window. And then I say, you know what? Have you tried doing a day or two of water fasting in there with it? And I don't get a whole lot of takers on that, because that's hard. It's hard for the first time or two, the first week or two, and then it becomes a lot easier. But your body does become hardened to it. Thank you, Chuck. You're an inspiration to all of us, including myself, that we need to get our bodies hardened again. Let's go back, get some hard bodies. Bob Weiss, good morning from the North Georgia mountains. Good morning to you, Bob. Raj Siradala, can anxiety kill a person? Well, I met an endocrinologist once who said he felt like the vast majority of diabetes was really due to anxiety and poor sleep. Now, how did he get that? Well, here was his thing. He said, anxiety continued creates cortisol, and cortisol creates diabetes. And I don't think anybody would argue that prediabetes and diabetes kills a lot of people. And I think a lot of us know that it kills more people than any single thing there. My BJJ, plaque 2, 90. Quest says I'm optimal, defined as less than 120. cardiologist says great, but your Quest says less than 75. Please note same units and same company. Yeah. Plaque 2 is a challenging test. Even the same company, Quest, will often use different test kits. Even these large companies have test kits that they purchase from suppliers. And those test kits have some variability in terms of how they measure. And it is what it is. So welcome to my world. Nothing is ever simple. Okay, so from reviewing the literature, it seems like plaque 2 varies widely, study to study. Yes, exactly. It sounds like, and here's another thing. If it weren't just for the difficulties in testing and the variation in test kits, BJJ, there's also a significant genetic variation, just like there is in so many other things. A lot of us tend to run hot in terms of plaque 2, a little bit higher. Not a big problem, but you know what? That's why we've got a panel. That's why we don't look just at plaque 2 alone. But let me finish your comment. I'm getting ahead of myself here. It seems that plaque 2 varies widely, study to study. It sounds like slight modifications to the assay make a huge difference. Perhaps important to stay with the same lab. Well, if you can get Quest to standardize to the same lab kit, I will be very impressed. Quest says they're a national lab. So does LabCorp. National labs. I used to work with a team that formed LabCorp, and once you start hearing how quote national laboratories were built, you begin to understand why there's just continued huge variability even within a national lab. Okay, you should also note my BMI improved from 27 to 24. Well, that is huge, BJJ. And yes, one thing when you said you were getting rid of your insulin resistance, if you cut body fat, you will. That is the one thing, that and some drugs like pioglitazone. Lifestyle is huge, but the biggest impact is losing body fat, because body fat is it drives insulin resistance. I won't go into that whole bunny hole again. My BMI improved from 27 to 24 with a low-carb, plant-based diet. When I added IF, my weight stayed the same, but IR seemed to improve beyond what I achieved with low-carb alone. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing. My BJJ plaque 2, this is Bob Bell. Plaque 2 was 37. Their optimal value was 75. Cleveland Heart Lab. Well, Cleveland Heart Lab has been purchased by Quest now. And the good thing is that now everybody can get access across the country to the Cleveland Heart activities. There was some downsides too, which, again, I won't go into right now. So, BJJ, suggestion, buy an exercise bike so that you can work out while you participate in Dr. Brewer's podcast. Works great. Well, I would share with you, I've done exactly the same thing. I have spent hour after hour after hour standing on an exercise bike and a Nordic track. I have a Nordic track set up with a desk, and an indoor exercise bike set up with a desk as well. Many of you may remember I've done a lot of work for Google, their healthcare programs on site. And Google was the first employer, other than myself, where I saw they had desks hooked up to treadmills. Now it's become much more of a thing. This was 10 years ago. My BJJ, okay, so we got that. Kyle Walker, what's your preferred mild hypertensive medication? It's the ACE inhibitors. And here's why. The ACE inhibitors, together with low-dose statins, have a multiplicative effect on cardiovascular inflammation. You remember that stuff where you start getting your immune system attacking the plaque in your arteries and creating that gooey liquid with the cells, immune cells in it? ACE inhibitors and statins at a low dose tend to have a multiplicative effect. They both impact that. For those of us who have prediabetes, that's a big, big deal. Bob Bell, low-carb, high-fiber diet has substantially resolved my IR, but have impaired glucose tolerance, probably due to lack of first-phase insulin secretion. Thank you, Bob. And I think Bob shared with us several articles in that space. I know I've recorded a couple of things on that, Bob. I don't know if it's come out yet, or if, you know, things just sort of fade altogether. But we've got some good information, good articles coming out about that first phase versus second phase of glucose response. Kyle Walker, what's your preferred? Whoa, we're going backwards here. Oh no, it was repeated. Resolved IR. Okay, James Cantor, good to talk to you, or good to hear from you, James. Not ear 8 p.m. has been so hard for me, i.e. eating late at night. I'm guessing what you're saying, it's not very clear, but it sounds like you're saying it's hard to stop eating early in the evening. That's a big deal for a lot of folks. It's not so much of a problem for me. Again, the problem for me is when I get off the wagon like I am right now, getting back on and getting hardened again. Martin Irving, hey folks, intermittent faster here, 6 years plus, amazed at the health benefits and body composition improvement it generates over time. I was already lean. You know, I will say this, Martin. I was already lean too. I tended to have a BMI 20 to 22 most of my adult life. It wasn't until I got past 63 that I finally got a waist size less than 33. And I don't know how much of that was intermittent fasting and how much of that was carbs, restricting carbs. But again, very good point. And I'm not alone. A lot of us have gotten better body composition in our 60s than we ever had in the rest of our lives. My BJJ, Dr. Brewer, thanks to you, I have developed a passion to inform others about prediabetes and also elevated LP-little-a, both of which I learned 16 months ago that I have. Please keep up the good work. BJJ, thank you so much for making that point. We have started trying to deal with this whole issue of health literacy. And here's a personal mea culpa. My channel is geeky. It is really geeky. I mean, using words like autophagy, mitophagy, IGF-1. Now, here's why. A lot of it's just based on my own insecurity. All of us have, or most of us have, some problems with public speaking, and I'm certainly one of them. So if I wanted to get content out for people for this issue, for this problem that we've talked about. But, you know, I was afraid, oh, these doctors are going to look at this. I'm licensed in, 46 different states, and I'm afraid, oh boy, the medical boards of all these states are going to be looking at this, trying to, you know, anyhow. So I go into painful detail about the technical aspects to make sure that it's technically correct. And unfortunately, what that does is it leaves the majority of people in the dust in terms of health literacy. And here's another problem with health literacy. It's a big, big, big deal. Guess which generation, which age groups have the worst health literacy? 65 and above. Guess which generation, which ages we work with, you know, tend to focus. Well, I'd love to see a lot more 20-year-olds, a lot more 30-year-olds, but it's usually 65 and above. In fact, if you look at our subscriber base, over half of our subscribers are 50 and older. So thank you so much for bringing this issue up, BJJ. I'm working to get more 6th grade level content, but again, autophagy and mitophagy are not 6th grade level. One thing that I am saying, and where I'm going with all this is, we've got 75,000 subscribers out there. You guys, because of your knowledge, most of you know more than 90% of doctors, 98, 99, 95% of doctors about this specific topic. You are leaders within your community. And like BJJ, guys, we all need to step up, you included. You that, you know, whoever's watching today, whoever sees this video, start thinking about the fact that, you know what, you probably know more than most of the doctors that your friends are seeing, that your family is seeing in this specific space. And it's a very important space. So like BJJ, I would ask you, step up, put it out there. Don't be shy, or don't succumb to your shyness and insecurities. Voice what you know, because you can be saving lives doing that. And the failure to do it, obviously, is a failure to save lives. Thank you, BJJ. Art Berry. I've practiced time-restricted eating, 18 and 6 for just a few months, and my A1C has gone from 8 to 5.5. Good for you, Art. Congratulations, and thank you so much for sharing that. That's a big deal. It's remained that, or about 5 or 6 for these months, also with metformin. Metformin will help. Thank you so much for sharing that, Art. Martin Irving, fasted exercise is highly recommended. The body is in a catabolic state. I would agree. It's just another way of pushing it just a little bit farther. Hence the synergy between exercise and fasting. No question. Thanks for sharing that. Hope I didn't skip that. Looks like we got a little baby picture there. I haven't been able to exercise since my daughter was born, so I tried fasting. I lost 1 to 2 pounds every day of full-on fasting. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Steve. One of the things that people need to see is that we tend to get confused between the importance of exercise and fasting. Remember this: you cannot outrun a diet. And look up some of these YouTube videos where you got the guy on a treadmill and the guy sitting next to the treadmill, eating pizza, drinking beer, and they're showing the caloric output on the treadmill and the caloric intake sitting down eating pizza and beer. The thing is going like this on the treadmill, the clicker. That's how fast it's going. On the other hand, the guy next to him, he's pulling in calories at this kind of rate. You cannot out-exercise a diet. So, Steve, thank you for bringing that issue up. Diet is number one. I should say water fasting. Thank you for clarification. Martin Irving, what's your height, Ford? 6 feet, 183 centimeters. I am 5'10". And again, recently I've gotten up to 165. The other thing that's going on with me is I've done a lot of resistance training for muscle mass. You know, when you start getting into the mid-60s, one of the absolute biggest risk factors is loss of muscle mass. So, and I've got this with a lot of people, especially as we start trying to maintain our weight, maintain our body fat mass. Often with diet, you lose not only the fat, but you can also lose that muscle mass. So I've got one of those challenges, trying to balance increased muscle mass and maintain my height. Maintain my weight. Sharia, both of my parents have diabetes and kidney disease. My father passed away 11 years. Worried because I have one kidney. Just found out at 50. Boy, surprise. Thank you for sharing that. Greg, without diabetes, when I am in good, strong ketos, it's much easier for me to fast. That's interesting. You know, it's that 2 to 3 day down period. When people go into a major protracted water fast, day one, after you get hardened to it, day one's not so bad. It's day 2, sometimes 3, that really sort of cranks on you. You feel bad. You got that brain fog. You're grumpy. And then after that, you click into ketosis. You begin to feel a lot better, and you get increased energy. So thanks for sharing that, Greg. My BJJ, per your comment, yes, I will continue to attempt to control insulin resistance the rest of my life. Thank you for sharing. Sharya, my cortisol is high. How to lower it? One of the most important things is sleep. If you have, I mean, it's already been documented. Read the book, Sleep, Why We Sleep, by, fellow's name is Walter something or other. Somebody fact check me on that. Why We Sleep. It's a great book. And one of the things he talks about is the impact of cortisol on just a not so good one night of sleep. It can cause insulin resistance for 48 hours. And it's not even sleep where you said, I didn't sleep at all last night, or where you would even notice that you had bad sleep. You still can get significant cortisol to the extent that it's driving insulin resistance from just a not great night of sleep. So, Shar, great point. Thank you for bringing it up. Metal 7 Core. Hello, I'd heard that keto dieting lowers free testosterone. Is there some truth in that? I didn't think so, but I'm not the expert on that Metal 7 Core. Maybe we can get some others out there to weigh in on it. Long term, I will tell you this, long term, decrease in body fat is one of the most important things to maintain testosterone levels. So I think if there's any negative impact, it's probably more of a short-term kind of thing. So I'm going to leave it at that comment and move ahead. Chad Townsend, 47 here. That just went right over my head. Thank you, Bill. Matthew Walker. That's right. It's not Walter. It's Matthew Walker. He wrote the book, Why We Sleep. Bill H. Why We Sleep. Excellent book. Thank you so much, Bill. Chad Townsend. No carbs for 1 month now. No carbs? Could you define that? Lowered blood pressure to 120 or lower. No surprise about that. Again, we are coming to the end of our questions, and gosh, we've been on for an hour. Time flies when you're having fun. Thank you so much for your interest. And let me just say this one more time. If you haven't had any of our services, if you don't, and most important, if you don't know whether you're insulin resistant or not, and if you're age 60 or above, you probably are. If you're age 50, you may have a more than a 50% chance. In fact, if you're age 30 or more, according to the UCLA studies, you probably do. Why did I bring that up again? Because again, we're giving away a whole lot of free attendance at the Monday webinar for prediabetes. Call JR or Michelle at 859-721-1212. I'm trying to get to that slide, but I don't think it's going to come up for some reason. Let me see if I can find that slide and show you that one more time. Don't know if I'm going to find it or not. Let me see. Yep. Let me just repeat that. If you don't know whether or not you've got insulin resistance, what I would suggest is that you find out. There's a very easy way to do that. We've got one coming up October 19th, this coming Monday, 11 o'clock Eastern Time. Call JR or Michelle at 859-721-1414. And thank you again for your interest.